excited to spend some time with you on what we're going to talk about today and Thursday. It's not quite as, mindfulness is like, wow, this is really the central, but this is right up there pretty close. I think we've talked about this before. The stress response itself. Okay, let's get our minds rolling. Stress response, remember how it looked. Remember what it's for, right? Have we talked about this? What are the two primary emotions that are naturally occurring during the stress response? So think about the fight or flight response. What two emotions do you hope are in the game while you're in the fight or flight? What do you think? Fear and anger, right? Why do you say that? Why do you think we would want to have fear and anger as naturally occurring emotions during the fight or flight response when we are being chased or being attacked? Why? Yeah, that emotion gives you more juice, right? There's so many examples. So in the short run, and get this, guys, I don't want you to not have these emotions. In the short run, when there is a real threat, like everything else that happens, it's really useful. It's really valuable to have those two emotions rolling. The problem we run into is, in the long run, those two emotions and all the other emotions that we have, but especially those two emotions, can get in the way of us functioning well and being happy and being peaceful. Let's kind of get bigger. So we've got all of the emotions, right? All the different emotions that we have. Hundreds of them. We could run the gamut: frustration, sadness, overwhelm, joy, elation, peaceful, whatever it is. Do they just happen? Do you just have those emotions, like sadness, for example? Do you just get sad suddenly out of nowhere? Do you just get overwhelmed suddenly out of nowhere? So there's two places where emotions can be generated. The first of these is subconscious conditioning. And what I mean by that is, you might be doing something and some situation, some event, something happens that triggers a past conditioned response, and you just like you walk into a room and for no real good reason you just suddenly feel, oh geez, something's wrong here. Some kind of conditioning or some kind of training has helped you to feel a certain way when something's wrong. Now, I don't want to spend any time here. We do play with this in the Mind-Body Wellness class quite a bit. But in here, the focus of our conversation here looks like this. We always have a thought that leads to the emotion. We always have, not always, because there's sometimes, but most of the time, we have a thought about something, an interpretation about something. Interpretation that is the thought. So, what's an example? Let's say that you have a cat that you really like. Does anyone have a cat that they really like? Do you? So if your cat died that you really liked, so an event, and there's usually an event that precedes it. Cat dies. You have an interpretation. What is the interpretation that, or the thought that you're generating that is likely when your cat dies, if you like the cat? So that's the resulting emotion. What's the interpretation? What's the thought? Why would you be sad? What's the reason for being sad? Cat's gone. No more cat. So in this case, it's cat dies. I like being with the cat, but now that the cat's dead, no companionship of the cat, right? An interpretation, and that thought leads to the emotion of, who said it? Sadness, right? Now, let's change this, and don't get me wrong, I like cats, mostly. But what if your cat was in constant pain and had cancer, or and it dies because of the cancer, and it's in constant pain? What might be a different thought that you have here? What? Okay, so it's not so much, and I'm not saying you still wouldn't feel this way, but if you thought, relief for the cat. So if that's your thought, what's the emotion that's likely to follow it? Yeah, right? You get that? Now, I'm not saying this is the way it works. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's always your own interpretation, always, right? So, does that make sense to that point? So let's play with anger for a minute. If this is an event happens, we have an interpretation that leads to an emotion of anger. What's the thought that leads to the emotion of anger almost every time? Think about, okay, I want you all to do this. On your piece of paper, I want you to write this down. I want you to write down an incident that happened to you recently where you found yourself getting angry. So write down the event. What happened where you noticed yourself getting angry? And don't say, I never get angry. Everyone does. We just know we did it to ourselves, not somebody else. But that's later on. So I want you to write down something. And you don't have to go into a lot of detail. I just want you to have it clear in your mind what happened. And then you noticed. So there was an event, and you noticed yourself angry. Now, I want you to analyze this accurately. We have to be accurate. What was the perception? What was the interpretation? What was the thought that you had about the event that turned into the emotion of anger? Anybody? What did it sound like? Because it's almost always the same thing with anger. It sounds, the interpretation, the thought here is almost always the same with anger. What was the thought that you had? So anyone want to tell me what happened to you?
So,
what happened? What was the event?
A mandatory work meeting, and my assistant manager called in sick 20 minutes before.
Okay.
And he had a heart attack, he was supposed
And so guy didn't show up for the meeting. You found yourself getting mad? Okay. So what was the thought that you had that resulted in you getting mad?
Well, he's left early or shown up late every weekend for the past 4 weeks, so I'm like, you're doing this again.
Okay.
Seriously?
Okay.
So it's that he keeps not showing up.
All right. Hold on to that one. Perfect. Somebody else. Some situation, some event. I want to show you how every time you are angry, it sounds the same way in your brain. And that's a perfect example, and we'll try a few others. Anybody else before I start pointing?
Somebody pulled out in front of me and then went slow.
While you're driving?
Yes.
Okay. That works. So there was an event, and you found yourself getting mad? Okay, same thing. Sort of. Okay, so what was the thought that you had?
My thought was, what the crap, you make me slow down when you don't even speed up, now I have to go slow behind you?
Okay. And I'll reinterpret that. I mean, I'll say that in a slightly different way so that it matches. Each of these are saying the exact same thing. I want you to see the common thread. Because as soon as you get this thread, as soon as you get this, oh, that's what I'm saying. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't ever get angry. But I want you, once you recognize that there is a thought that you control before the emotion of anger, then you can pretty much decide whether you want to get mad instead of things just happening and you get mad. There's a space in between that whole idea of choosing that we've talked about. Okay, somebody else. What happened to you?
I was taking a test last night, and halfway through the test, I realized I read the wrong chapters. We've done for this test. And it's an open book test, so I had 60 minutes to go through and answer all these questions that I didn't know anything about.
So you got mad at you. So the event was you recognized suddenly that you were looking at the wrong chapter, and then you noticed yourself getting mad, only this time instead of the two people outside of you, it was you inside of you, right? You, oh, why did I do this, right? Okay. What was the thought that you had?
Well, that's stupid.
Okay. Why would you call it stupid?
I wrote the wrong one.
Yeah?
I spent all that time reading it.
Okay. Keep listening to those. That's a perfect example. There's a common thread with all three of these. Somebody else. Okay, so somebody said, you said something, somebody dismissed your point of view, and you found yourself mad at that person for saying what he or she said, correct? Okay. So what is it that what was the thought that you had right before you got angry?
Probably myself, but I'm right.
Well, it's always selfish. Anger is always selfish. There's nothing wrong with it either. Anger is 100% selfish, as we'll get to in a second. So it's okay.
Just that wasn't fair for them to not accept that idea.
Okay. There's a word. There's two words that are common to all four of these. What is that word that is part of this interpretation that we're having? It feels like that. Yeah, there's a simpler word than that, but it's saying the same thing. Because every one of these, something didn't happen the way we thought it should happen. In every one of these that I heard, he shouldn't have done that. He should have shown up. Who's the other one? I should have read the right chapter. What was the other one? He shouldn't have pulled out in front of me. That's the thought that precedes the emotion of anger every time. Whether it's anger at, world issues, they should not be bombing that country. And I'm right, and this is why I think it's interesting you said it's selfish, but anger is always selfish because we think we're sure of how things should be. People should not drive in front of me slow. Do you get that? I remember I was once listening to this. I think I said this. That's where we said this in the other class. I was listening to this lady presenting at this conference, and she said, "We have to stop shoulding all over ourselves." You get that, right? Now, again, I'm not saying don't get angry, but what I am saying is recognize this is what's causing the anger. Right? This is what's causing the anger, how I'm interpreting it, not the event. How can I prove that? How do I know that's for sure, that it's not the event? We've been through this before. Oh, did you have one?
Well, I was just thinking that you could have all the same people in the same room, and you could talk to them individually and their perspective on what, like maybe your class is. Someone could say, like, that's the best class ever, or someone could think it's
total waste of time.
Whatever. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a lot of how you approach it. That's how I think you can prove that your thought can control your emotion, because you could all have the same experience and your story would be different from everyone.
Okay. Let's simplify that just a little to just anger, because you kind of you're relating several possible emotions. Think about this. Hold on one second, then you're at a football game. There's lots of fans in the stands, and you're one of the fans. The quarterback goes back, and he throws an interception that results in a touchdown that ends up winning the game for the team that was on defense. Is that, and let's say it's at a game where fans are coming from all over to watch it. It's not just everybody's for the same, for one team in the stands. Is everybody in the stands going to be upset at that interception? No? Who won't? The fans who are for the defensive team, right? They're going to be like, yeah. The fans who are for the team that just lost, man, why did he do that? Right? Same exact event. One group interpreted it as that shouldn't have happened. The other group is, this is the greatest thing that could have happened. Same exact event. That tells me it's not the event. Who's the one person? There's one person at this football game who doesn't go either way. He's just mindful. He or she is just mindful. The ref, right? He's not interpreting it as so-called bad, or it shouldn't have happened, or man, that's great. He's just, here's what happened, mindful. Now, I'm not putting any judgment on any of those three. You're not superior because you're never angry, nor are you superior because you get ticked off at the right things. It's just how it works is what I want us to focus on. Okay, we good with that so far? Yeah.
If you think certain thoughts, and those thoughts then cause emotion,
Mm-hmm.
then one way or another, can you somehow maybe turn that around and say, you know what? I'm feeling this emotion. I wonder what thoughts I'm entertaining that is causing this event.
That's the very thing that I would say that we should do. If we're constantly, let's use the example of a person who's depressed. what is the dominant thought of a person who is frequently depressed? What are some of the dominant thoughts? Hopelessness. Okay. What are some others? Hopeless is a very, very common one. Low self-worth. What? Sadness. Now, all those are emotions. And I'm not saying those are bad. But if we take what you said and we think, and I know people are thinking, it's not that easy. But it still might be, if you could trust this process enough. If I don't want to feel hopeless, if this is a true how things are, if I don't want to feel hopeless, if I don't want to feel sad, if I want to feel happy and peaceful and joyful, what could be the thought that would lead to the feeling of joyfulness? You could immediately go to gratitude. Remember our levels of responding? And that what was above the line, that bold line? If you go to gratitude, man, I'm just so grateful I'm alive. I'm so grateful if you just walk through your whole day going, man, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that I can see food, that I can then taste, that I can then experience, and then it becomes my bicep. You can think about that. Isn't that cool that you eat a steak and in 2 days it's going to be here and here? Isn't that cool? You don't make any of that happen, but some part of you is able, some intelligent part of you is able to make the bowl of cereal that you had this morning, some of it will go into your muscles, some of it will go into fat cells, some of it will go into your liver, and you don't have to make any of that happen. I mean, if you start talking about how cool we are as human beings, there's no end to the gratitude. Holy cow, how cool are we? That we can see stuff. That I can look here and I can see her hand going up peripherally. How cool is that? You see, I mean, you could go on and on and on about, and all I'm trying to do is say, instead of the emotion of hopelessness, if I just go to, wow, this is so cool, and I made that my dominant thought over and over and over and over and over and over and over, the emotion would be different. It wouldn't be depressed. Or it wouldn't be sad, or it wouldn't be, hopeless or whatever. If you said to yourself, if I'm alive, there must be some purpose. I haven't figured it out yet, but just being alive demands that I have a purpose. Is that a different thought than, there's nothing to be worth living? Do you see that? That's powerful. Yeah. No, that's okay.
How do we get from this should and shouldn't be to allow it?
Okay, good question. You always seem to be right ahead of, the nice perfect segue to where I'm going next. Thank you very much. Has anyone in here got road rage? You two do? And your nonverbal said you have really bad road rage. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to make you not have road rage. Okay? I don't care if you do. It's up to you. Do you find that your road rage is different than peaceful and happy? You do, right? Okay. So, and if you'd rather have peaceful and happy, this is how we get there. But if you just want to have road rage because you want to, then go ahead. I don't care. I'm not trying to change. But this is a perfect example of all the angers that we have. How do we change it so that we are peaceful and happy? So, what I know for sure is we have what are called rules. And a rule is simply a belief that we have that something should happen a certain way. We have a belief so a belief is just a feeling of certainty, right? That something should happen, this is getting messy, should happen a certain way. That's what we call rules. A belief, a feeling of certainty that something should happen a certain way. So when you're on the road and you notice yourself, the two of you, having road rage, what's the belief that you're telling yourself that's turning into road rage? People need to stay out of my way. Or is that what you say too? People should be driving faster, right? It always, this word showed up again. Something should happen a certain way. I have this belief my cats and dogs, if I have them, should not poop on my sofa, my couch. It's a good belief. They should not do their business on our furniture. Or I also have a belief that when I'm meditating, my kids should not be playing the piano. Right? That's just a belief, it's just a rule. There's no cosmic law that says people should drive fast on the freeways or get out of my way. There's no cosmic rule, there's no universal rule that says dogs and cats shouldn't poop on my couch or that my kids should not play the piano while I'm meditating. It's just a rule that I've made up about how I think things ought to be. With me? Because the instant that rule is broken, what's the resulting emotion? You get anger. Road rage, in your case. Or, I want to kill my animal. Or, you know, I get upset at my kid. Any time but these 10 minutes. Come on. So there's two ways that I know of, unless you want to stay with road rage, but I want to be peaceful most of the time. I want to be happy and peaceful. So I realized I've got to do something with this right here, this rule. And so what can we do? We can change the first thing we can do is we can change our rule. Now this might seem like, well, I can't change my rules. People should drive faster. But how could you do it if you wanted to? What could you say? What could be a different rule besides people need to drive faster on the freeway? Yeah. Your rule is, I'll get there when I get there. And I can't change people's behavior. Or, I can't affect how fast people are going on the road. I can't do anything. No matter how mad I get, there's nothing I can do. So what I hear you saying is, I'm going to reinterpret the situation. They call this, in psychology, they call it cognitive restructuring, where you think about it in a different way, one that doesn't include this should there. I have one, it isn't so much the slow guys, although I'm not fond of people driving slow on the freeway either. When I go down to St. George, we go down south quite a bit, and my thinking is everybody should be driving 100 miles an hour. That's just how fast our cars are capable of driving that, and there's nobody within 2 miles of you.
What did you just call that?
Cognitive restructuring. Now, when I'm driving in traffic that is quite messy, quite busy, sometimes these guys come through, and it's always a guy. I don't know for sure if it's always a guy, but It's always a guy, and he's always in a Camaro or a Mustang or something, and he just flies by 120 miles an hour, and the rest of us are going 75. And in that instant, I find myself going, God, what he's doing, like crazy guy. How could I reinterpret that so that I don't get the least bit upset? Here's what I have done. The way that I say it is, the way I interpret it, and it doesn't matter if it's true or not, doesn't matter at all. I say, that guy's wife is in the back seat and she's going to have a baby in 5 minutes. And if she doesn't get to the hospital, then the baby's going to come out in the car. And that would be a tragedy for that baby and the mom. So go as fast as you can. And a little bit for the owner of the car. Do you see what I've just done? Now, it's obviously it's not true. There's never a baby in the back seat being born. But that's what I say to myself. That doesn't include people shouldn't drive fast. I say, go ahead. There's probably a good reason. And what happens then is I stay peaceful. I stay happy. And that to me is more important than trying to make the other person wrong. Idiot driver, why can't you drive faster? You see how that works? All we have to do is take control of this little thought here that is the should and upgrade it to what I call a preference. I prefer that people didn't drive fast, and I can't control them. The thing was upgrade your demands to a preference. That's how I would say, in answer to your question, how do I just allow things? You upgrade your demand. In other words, instead of saying, this should happen, we say, I'd prefer this happen, and that leaves flexibility for how you decide to feel. Can you feel that? I'd prefer things happen this way. Because you do. You want people to drive fast on the freeway. I'd prefer that. And I don't have control about how fast things are going today. And that, if that's the thought that we have, then we stay peaceful. And you can do that with anything that is. So instead of with your guy who didn't show up. So the demand was, the should was, he should be here today, correct? So how would you rephrase that? How would you cognitively restructure that so that you upgrade this to a preference? How would that sound in your self-talk? Now, if you can you feel how if he said that? Now, that's not wimping out either. Because people say, well, if you just prefer stuff, then you're just wimping out. You're not really going for stuff. There's times to be angry if you're choosing to. But if you just can't control it, you're just upset for no reason, and it's not going to help the situation, I don't see a good reason to go there. There's plenty of good reasons why anger is really, really dangerous for our heart health. Really, really good reason to support. Anger does horrible things. It's like nicotine as far as what it does to the heart, to the blood vessels. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, and so all I heard you do just then is you restructured your thought about it. You cognitively restructured your thought about it from a demand to a preference, from a demand to a different way of looking at it that doesn't involve anger, that doesn't result in anger. Do you get that? That's powerful. And again, doesn't mean you don't ever get angry. Okay, any questions about anger? Yeah. Oh, and this is exactly the same, what you would find in an anger management. There's no other way to approach it. It has to be, because you can't control anything outside of you. You can't control that I mean, if you're water skiing and it's windy, you know, that's one of the worst things that can happen, like we talked about before. You can't control that. So you have to take control of it inside, because the elements aren't going to always be in your favor. The environment is not always going to be how you always want it. And people for sure aren't going to be how you always want them to be. But if you have to have, it's kind of like the phrase, if your happiness depends on things outside of you being a certain way, you're doomed. Do you hear that? If your happiness depends on things outside of you always being a certain way, you're doomed. Why? They'll never be always how you think they should be. They will sometimes, but many times, totally contrary to how you think they should be. So we have to go inside and say, if I can't control this, and I still want to be happy, then I need to be able to control this right here. If this is a true pattern, which I think it is, and plenty of people throughout all of history have said the same thing. You know, and we get so wrapped up, I don't want to belabor this point too much, but we think tragedies are always bad. We think, oh, I failed this test, or I should have done better on this test, and now I have to switch majors because I can't survive in this major. And we end up in something else that turns out to be far better for us than, say, that major, or that relationship, or that drive down the road, or whatever. I mean, we could really extend this, and we actually play with this idea in Mind, Body, Wellness, that you never know for sure. But if things have to be a certain way, we're doomed. Okay? All right. Any other thoughts about anger? Question. If I have somebody coming into my house who's trying to hurt my family, oh man, I want to have as much anger as possible, so that I generate that emotion that gives me strength and power to take my Louisville Slugger and beat the tar out of him, so he doesn't hurt my family. The thing about that is those times are so infrequent. The times when anger really comes in, is a useful emotion, is very, very, very rare, less than 1% of the time. And I think there are occasions when being angry. The other thing I think sometimes is, if we feel like there's an important change that needs to be made, maybe a social change, or some kind of something's just not going right and people are getting hurt, sometimes that emotion of anger, this should not be happening this way, moves us to act, to make changes to laws, or make changes to rules, or make changes to common behaviors. I think that's a different anger than the road rage, where it's just right now, right? But I think there's a little bit of, when we get angry on those rare occasions, it's motivational. But it's very, very rare, I think.
You hear that and then you just don't see it? Like, what do you...
Well, if you go to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talked about the grieving process, she said there were 5 stages that people go through whenever they lose something that means a lot to them. Do any of you remember this in your psychology classes? Please tell me they still are talking about Kubler-Ross. Nobody? Who's our you're our psychology person. Do you talk about Kubler-Ross at all? The 5 stages of grieving. Do you remember what they are? Denial. Anger's next. Good. Starts with B. Bargaining. Who said that? Bargaining. So Kubler-Ross, she worked with people, as you're thinking about it. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross worked with people who were going through, their family members had died. She worked a lot with around people who were dying or had died, and the family members who survived the one who died. And she found that there was a natural process. She said this is a natural thing that people go through when they've lost, and it could be just your watch or your phone, but mostly it was with people who they loved, how she discovered this. And they would go through these 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining. Do you remember the 4th one starts with a D? The one that lasts the longest. That's the first one. Like, no, this shouldn't have happened. Go through this in your own self. Think about, you just lost your phone, and you know you're not going to find it. Okay, that's close to death of a loved one for some of us. So the first thought you're going to have, no, this couldn't have happened. And then anger, usually self-anger in that case. How could I have done that? Bargaining, what would that sound like? There's a possible, or we go, God, angels, whoever's in charge of finding cell phones, I promise in order to find my phone. Do you know what I mean? Or please bring this person back, I'll live a good life, or whatever. Bargaining. Denial, anger, bargaining, and then the recognition that it's not coming back. What sets in? Depression sets in. Depression. Ugh, crap. And that's what usually lasts the longest when people, like with my brother who died, it was hard for members of our family. I mean, it took 6 months for some of us to really be at the 5th stage, which was acceptance, right? Where you be okay with, yeah, I don't have this phone anymore, I don't have this wedding ring, or I don't have this person in my life anymore. And she said, and plenty of psychologists would agree, when you're going through that process, you don't hurry the state. They're natural. That there is a natural, when it's a loss, it's a natural thing to go through those stages. It's not she felt like it was a common trait of man whenever there's a loss. I don't want to take any emotions away from anybody. I think we're meant to cry. We have lacrimal ducts because we're supposed to cry. We're supposed to get angry. We're supposed to be sad. We're supposed to have all these. We're supposed to be afraid at times. It's okay. As long as it's not long-term getting in the way of our inner peace. That's when I would go, yeah, you need to move on. You need to do some cognitive restructuring. Your cat dies, go through the sorrow of it. So we played with anger, and now we all know it's our choice. We get angry because we choose that interpretation. So let's explore fear. If anger is, this should not be happening, or this shouldn't have happened that way, or he should not be doing this, or she should not be doing that, or shouldn't have done. Anger is almost always a focus on the past or present. This shouldn't be happening right now. Correct? So what is the thought if that equation, if emotions are preceded by a thought that's an interpretation, what's the thought that precedes the emotion of fear? Right, on your paper, do this. Write down something that you find yourself fearful about, where you think about it and you just go, oof. You know, that feeling of, oh, I don't. And I want to explore what that thought is. Something you're afraid of. Did we tell you what's the number one social fear in this country? Did we talk about that? Public speaking. Public speaking, right? Do any of you in here have a real fear of public speaking? You're not even, you're too afraid to even raise your hand. No, that's a real fear for you. Yes, so you're angry and fearful at times. Is anyone else, public speaking is not on their list of favorite things? A few of us? Okay. No judgment. I get it. So, there's one. Did anyone else, somebody wrote down something that you're afraid of? What did you write? Disappointing your parents. Okay. By doing what? Do you know, or just in general? So you're worried they might be disappointed by some behaviors you're choosing. Yeah, okay. Good one. Okay, anyone else?
My teen driver.
What?
My teenage driver.
Driving with a 15-year-old?
So what is the thought?
The fear, the thought is,
What's the thought that leads to the emotion of fear?
what if he gets in an accident?
Okay, good.
Mine is, are they gonna drive right? Like, I have a 15-year-old that's learning to drive, and I'm always hanging on to the handle. She's getting better, but it's scary to teach a kid to drive because I'm like, all right, slow down, and I tend to go from the fear to the anger. Because I'm like, slow down, you're gonna hit him.
And
they don't like to drive with
and then
me,
you
so
hit
I'm
him,
like,
and then you're, why did you hit him?
That is a true fear.
A true fear?
Like a real one.
Are
like
there?
legitimate,
Is there a
like
false
legitimate.
fear?
Your fear is not legitimate. Mine is legitimate.
It feels legitimate to me.
What did you write down for yours? Did you write something? How about you, Rach?
I have a fear that my credit's going to go down the tubes because my name on the house with my ex, that he will just stop listening to it.
Okay. Now that's a legitimate, right?
That's totally legitimate.
What did you write down?
Said open ocean.
What?
Open ocean.
Oh, yeah.
Describe that a little bit more.
Just being out.
And you're afraid that
Scary to me.
of what?
No idea what's beneath me, what's around me.
Because now let's keep going with this. What in your mind are you thinking could happen? By how?
Drowned, get eaten by something.
Okay, so I want you to listen to all of these things. Each one of them was future focused, right? So with each of these examples, what's the common thread thought that precedes the emotion of fear? What if what? What something terrible happens? So the thought is, there might be pain down the road. That's the thought. It's not now. It's down the road, there might be pain. And fear is the feeling of wanting to avoid that pain. Fear is it's either you run or you freeze. Both of those are fear. You're running to get away from it, or you're freezing, so fight or flight or freeze. Fear is part of that, where I ain't going in the ocean. Right? Do you get that? Because there's going to be some pain if I do. Because if I do crash, that will hurt. Because if he ruins your credit, what's the pain that you might experience? Okay. Now, none of those are physical pains, but you interpret them as pain nonetheless, correct? Emotional, whatever, spiritual, financial. We interpret those as pain, and our body will do. This is a truth that I'm sure of. Our body, our physiology, our mind will do more to avoid pain than anything else. We do not like pain. Nobody does.
But those are real things. Like, those are legitimate fears.
I'm not saying anything about the legitimacy of them. I'm not trying to take it away from her either. I'd be nervous. All these things that you said. Being in the ocean, in the middle of the ocean. I mean, any one of those could be legitimate. I just want us to understand how it works. Go ahead and have the fears. But if it's a fear that's stopping you from doing things you want, then we have to look at, can I do something about it? So we have to think, we have to realize again, we think, what's a good example? Spiders. Anyone here afraid of spiders? Just deathly afraid of, who?
Absolutely.
Oh, it was in the other class where we saw a spider rolling across. We were doing yoga, and girl up here just panicked. She was sitting right here, and there was a spider right there, and she just panicked. Is that what you do? Just spiders are whatever. Is it legitimate? No, I'm not trying to take that away from you, but if you're more than this far away from the spider, can the spider possibly hurt you? What? If it jumps. And that's why I went this far. Because that's the, what do they call it in basketball? The vertical of a spider is about this far, right? So if you're 5 feet away from it, it can't possibly hurt you, but you find yourself still afraid of it. And that's how most things are. It can't possibly hurt you. You're scared to death to call to ask him out. Oh, no, I can't possibly. Because it's always the thought of, there's going to be pain. Before we get into this, I want to approach fear from maybe a different angle. But if you want to do something, and it's your fear that's stopping you, then we have to do something about it. If you want something, but you fear that there's going to be some pain, but it's not there, then we have to do something about it. So, let me ask you this. Here's my question for you. And this is a direction that I just, when this was taught to me, I thought this is one of the coolest principles I've ever learned. So the question is, why are you here? Now, what I don't mean is, why are you here on a Tuesday morning at 11:30? I mean, why are you here on the planet? It's a little bit of a philosophical question. But how would you answer that question? Why are you here? Anybody? Just raise your hand. Here's why I feel like I'm around. So find my purpose. Or live my purpose. Find it and then live it. Is that what I hear you saying? Okay. There's a good one. I mean, there's no bad ones here. There aren't bad purposes or reasons why you're here. So be there for people. Be a friend. Sort of. I understand what you're saying, but to honor, what did you say? My Creator. Good. I like that. Somebody else.
To learn.
To learn what?
To learn how to interact with people. To learn how to, like, change your rules. Like, all this stuff is so fascinating. Like, it's just good life skills.
How many things are there to learn? People who study a certain, like if you were to study astronomy, just take astronomy, or music, or, do any of you play an instrument in here? What do you play? Those of you who play instruments and play them quite well and play them quite a bit, This is the way it seems to work with music, and it's the way it seems to work with just about everything out there. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn. And you can take any subject. Take astronomy. Wow, there's a Big Dipper up there. And then you start learning about the different aspects of it, and then you realize there's an infinite, like you said, there's an infinite amount of things to learn. Isn't that amazing? That all by itself makes life worth living. Just, holy cow, get into something. There's so many things there are to learn. Okay, what else? Anyone else?
When I think of the word fear, there's another word that comes to my mind is doubt.
Doubt?
Yeah, because they're associated somehow.
Oh, for sure. I think they're synonyms. They're very closely, almost synonyms. So here's what I want to do. On Thursday, we're going to start with this, and I'm going to present something to you that makes the idea of fear suddenly seem really appealing in a kind of an odd sort of way. If we can understand a different approach or a different way of looking at it, suddenly facing our fears, not the concept of fear, but the concept of facing our fears becomes a really fun game.